Hello there, guys. How you all doing? We're here to talk about the Caerphilly by-election results. Now, I would have chatted to you yesterday about it, but I've been a little bit unwell with a stomach bug the last day or so. So this is about the earliest I can come talk to you, feeling relatively human. So let's bring up the results, shall we? Surprise, surprise! Spoilers: Labour did not hold it, as we probably were going to expect there. I'm going to bring up some results for you here on the screen. So where are we at? Well, in our by-election for the Welsh Senedd, it was Plaid Cymru who came out the victor with 47.4% share of the vote. That's up 19 from where they were previously. And Reform ended up coming second with 36% of the vote. Labour in a very distant third on 11 points. So there's a few things to talk about here. That the first, I think probably the biggest thing to discuss is just the collapse of Labour. Um, I'm very used to talking about the narrative, the true narrative over the last few years of the complete crumbling of the support for the Conservative Party, and indeed that was very much the story of 2024. It was, I mean, we'd been seeing it for a few years before that, but it was very much confirmed to us in that general election, the absolute collapse of Tory support here in the country. And then indeed, even since the general election, last year, the Tories have actually slid further than that. So that's been sort of nailed on as one thing that we're kind of reading in the political landscape, which is the Tories collapsing. But indeed, what we are also seeing now is the collapse of Labour as well. And we've seen Labour collapsing in the opinion polls. We've seen them not doing particularly well in sort of local elections, things like that. But here we have a by-election for the Welsh Parliament, and Labour dropped from having held it to coming in a distant third on only just over 10% of the vote, which is quite remarkable, really. It's as if I think the collapse of the Tories at this point, that's old news. It's now about the collapse of Labour. Although that said, not to completely discount the Tories here, they're down 15 points from the last time round as well. So this was in 2021 when the last Senedd elections were. Now keep in mind, an awful lot has happened since then. An awful lot of that has happened since 2021. But since then, the Tories were on 17.3% of the vote. Now they were down to just 2%, which is remarkable. And all of the other parties, very, very minor shares of the vote as well. From what I've gathered from sort of what I've seen of the analysis done of this by-election, it seems that perhaps quite a number of supporters of what would have been other sort of left or centre-left parties have lent their support to Plaid in order to have them see off reform. That's of course not to discount for Plaid's own sake that they've done very well here and they've won it. I'm not trying to diminish that, but it seems to me that if you're a voter in that constituency and you didn't want reform to win and you saw that, okay, Labour's collapsing, we're done with Labour, Plaid are the ones most likely to beat them, it makes sense to me that there's a number of them that have sort of backed Plaid in order to see reform off. And perhaps, I mean, you could probably argue that that's been the case with some of these Labour voters. The Lib Dems, their support, they didn't have a very high amount that they were starting off with in the first place. Back in 2021, they had 2.7% share of the vote. This time round, it was 1.5, so nearly halving from where it was before, but it was pretty low. But that's my read on it. I think that probably most of your sort of centre-left voters have decided to go for Plaid in order to see off reform, although Plaid's probably up compared to where they were before previously. Speaking of reform, obviously it's part of looking at this election and this story is kind of going, oh, well, it was seen as a two-horse race between Plaid and reform. There was an opinion poll that had come out. Hang on, can we find it here? It was a Survation opinion poll from early October. That opinion poll had reform leading over Plaid by 4 points, with reform on 42%. But it was very much kind of, is it going to be reform? Is it going to be Plaid that ends up winning? So it's no doubt a disappointing result for reform in the sense that they weren't able to capture this from Plaid. Certainly, it doesn't feed into the narrative of consistently churning that momentum for them over and over again. But it is worth mentioning nonetheless that Reform have come from, I mean, where were they in 2021? 1.7% of the vote in 2021, and now they're in second place with 36% of the vote. That is still a remarkable turnaround for Reform in the space of 4 years, to have come from basically nowhere into being a very solid second place there. Despite the fact that they were unable to capture it, it does point to the fact that they are going to be quite serious contenders when it comes to the Welsh elections coming up next year, that they're going to end up having quite a large presence when all is said and done. Not least as well when you consider that I think they're changing the voting system in the Welsh Parliament elections next year, so it's going to be a form of proportional representation, which means that, you know, if you're there on the map with a certain degree of vote share, then you actually are going to see that manifest into seats. The question for next year is whether or not you end up with Reform ultimately capturing it, or whether it's a Plaid-led government. Obviously, Plaid have got more people that they would work with than Reform do. I think more naturally you can imagine that Plaid would probably end up working with Labour. They'd probably end up working with near enough anyone really, in order to see off Reform running the place. So tentatively at the moment, I'd expect that when all is said and done next year, we'll probably end up with a Plaid-led government in Wales. But in fairness, I would need to look at sort of the different areas going into that election to see how well they're exactly likely to do. But nonetheless, the takeaway from this by-election is the continued collapse of Labour and the Conservatives over the course of the last few years. The fact that the two of them, ostensibly the main two parties as they were once known, in this particular contest, receiving 13% of the votes between them. I'll repeat that, 13% of the votes between them, which is, again, remarkable. Now, of course, by-elections often are a slightly different beast from the proper full-on, full-fat milk elections. So maybe we can expect things to be a little bit different come next year. But nonetheless, I think that I don't know if I've touched on this before. I might have mentioned it once or twice, but what we kind of saw in a lot of different European countries, especially starting in the last decade, in the 2010s, was the decline and collapse of a lot of centre left and centre right parties in France, in Germany, and well, especially France. That's a good example. But we didn't really have that equivalent happen here in this country. In fact, if anything, if you remember that although sort of countrywide vote share was diversifying amongst lots of different parties in 2015 general election, 2017 being a Brexit election, also being Corbyn as leader as well, we ended up getting a lot more support moving back towards Labour and the Tories, and indeed that sort of continued on in the 2019 election where the Tories had a pretty good win. My theory on that basically is that, first of all, Brexit was there as sort of like having an interesting effect on the way that people were voting, that depending on the way that you felt about Brexit one way or the other, it was more likely perhaps you'd support the party that you either saw as delivering Brexit or delivering a harder Brexit, or one that would either soften Brexit or sort of, I hope I didn't cut out too much there. I've just had the screen refresh there. And indeed, sort of the push and pull that Corbyn had, a lot of people moving into Labour infused by Corbyn, but also a lot of people voting against Labour because they didn't like Corbyn particularly as well. But I think what made us therefore different from other European countries where the centre-left and centre-right parties did collapse a lot sooner than ours did, was the fact that, for example, Corbyn was able to come along, infuse a lot of voters. A lot of members came into the Labour Party. There was an element of sort of left-wing populism there, representing a real change from the status quo, and obviously people gravitated towards that. And indeed, with the Tories for a certain period of time, they were able to harness Brexit votes. And they were able to basically absorb, if you will, if I'm going to frame it this way, this right-wing populist anti-establishment energy for a period of time, and they were the ones who were able to bring those voters on side. And then obviously what ultimately happened is you've seen the Tories fizzle and diminish, and the rise of Reform, and indeed now you're seeing Labour collapsing as well, although it's a little bit more complicated with Labour's collapse because there's a lot more different left-wing or left-of-centre parties in the political buffet than there is on the right. So Labour's vote kind of spreads in more different directions than you have with the Tories going to reform. Um, but yeah, it seems that we are coming back into line in a way with what's been happening in a number of different countries, which is the centre left and the centre right collapsing, and the alternatives seem to be taking over. Um, Sky Echo is here and says, "Hi, Swiss, and well done." Is that well done supplied? It must be well done supplied. It's not well done for me getting over my stomach bug, is it? Anyhow, that was what you guys wanted to see. Just touching on the results of that by-election there. So we're taking a little look at that. God, there's more stuff that's going on, but as I've said to you, I'm not especially big on doing lots of politics content at the moment. Polling and elections is one thing, but Christ, when I look at everything else, and I think, okay, uh, Labour's got a new deputy leader, haven't they? Lucy, is it Lucy Powell? Was it Lucy Powell who won? I want to say it was Lucy Powell. It was Lucy Powell. And she's the one that's kind of seen as well. She was the one that Starmer booted out of the cabinet recently in a shuffle, wasn't it? And now she's come along because the ghost of Christmas past to come haunt him and say, Starmer, you're not being radical enough. Um, there's also in recent days we've had there was a guy who was arrested for sexual assault charges or something along those lines, who was going to be he'd been staying in one of the hotels after coming over on a small boat, and he was going to be deported, and somehow they fucked it up and accidentally released him, which is just remarkable, really. I don't know how you managed to fuck something like that up, but there you are. That's not a particularly good sign for anyone. Over in the States, no, you know what? I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I'm here chatting to you, but I'm not. I don't want to do it all. I don't want to talk about Trump fucking pardoning criminals and power grabs and all the rest of it. It's boring talking about the continued decline of Labour and how they seem to be fucking up just about everything they can do. I had a spot of interest where I was like, oh yeah, Zach Plansky and the Greens, that's interesting. But no, it's a horrible shit show at the moment. I'm not enjoying any of it, so I'm not gonna I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it. The next time I see you, I'll be playing Pokemon. There we are. You've had your dose of politics. Enjoy. Bye bye.